Nearly, Pope Leo XIV, still wearing his white cassock wrinkled by the weight of the day, stopped before the formation of the Swiss Guard. But when his eyes met ours, I saw something the cameras didn't capture. A man carrying the weight of 2,000 years of history, seeking strength in those who would now be his protectors. The entire hall held its breath at that gesture that broke all protocol in the first hours of his pontificate. Before we continue, subscribe right now to the channel and leave us in the comments what country you're watching from to be part of this unique testimony. I still get goosebumps remembering it. It had been barely 3 hours since the world had seen him on the balcony of the Basilica, and while the streets of Rome still vibrated with celebrations, inside the Vatican we were living a moment that no camera would record. The messenger arrived almost breathless. The Holy Father wants to see the entire guard. It's not part of protocol, but he insists it must be right now. We looked at each other confused. In my 17 years protecting these sacred walls, I had never seen anything like it. A newly elected pope normally rests, prays, prepares for the intense days to come. He doesn't call impromptu meetings. "Are you sure?" asked our commander. His exact words were, "Before this day ends, I need to see all of them," the messenger replied. I felt a chill. Something important was about to happen. The Clementine Hall glowed under the golden light of the Roman sunset. Sun rays entered through the high windows, illuminating the frescoes that have witnessed centuries of history. The sweet aroma of newly lit candles mixed with the unmistakable scent of incense that still permeated the air from today's ceremony. We formed in silence. The veterans at the front with that bearing that only years of service give. In the second row, the regular guards, men who have been serving the Pope for some years. And in the back, the youngest, some freshly arrived from Switzerland, for whom this was their first day protecting a new pontiff. I could feel the nervousness in the air. It wasn't just from the solemnity of the moment, but from the uncertainty. What did the Pope want to tell us with such urgency? My mind recalled the previous transition, when the humble Francis surprised the world. But this was different. This was an American with missionary experience in Latin America, a man who until this morning was Cardinal Provost and now carried the name Leo XIV, a name with history, with weight. The doors opened with a solemn sound, and there he was. The first thing that struck me was his solitude. He entered alone, without the ceremonial entourage, a man in white walking toward us with firm but tired steps. His face showed the marks of emotion and exhaustion. This man hadn't slept, probably had barely eaten. His entire world had changed in a matter of hours, and now, instead of resting, he was coming to see us. I noticed his slightly labored breathing, the nervous blinking, the way his hands lightly gripped the papal ring he still wasn't used to wearing. Small details that revealed his humanity under the weight of a divine responsibility. "My dear children," he began, and his voice resonated with a slight accent that mixed his American roots with his years in Peru. It was warm, direct, like a father speaking to his family. "I wanted to see you before this day ends because I needed to look into the eyes of those who from this moment will walk with me in this mission that God has placed in my hands." He paused for a moment. I saw him breathe deeply, as if searching for air, and swallow with difficulty. This wasn't a prepared speech, it was the heart of a man speaking from the vulnerability of his first day. "Until this morning," he said, and here his voice broke slightly, "you protected Francis, a holy man who taught me the meaning of humility and service. Now, by a divine design I still struggle to comprehend, you will protect me." It was then that something unexpected happened. The Pope took 2 steps forward, moving away from the ceremonial place where he should remain, and approached us directly. I could see his eyes clearly, tired eyes, but full of a quiet determination. "I didn't come here to speak to you as a head of state or as supreme pontiff. I came because today, when I chose to call myself Leo, I remembered something I cannot ignore." His gaze swept across our ranks. The young guards, normally impassive, couldn't hide their surprise at this unexpected closeness. Leo XIII, whose name I have partially taken, had a vision that led him to compose a prayer that for decades was recited at the end of every Mass, a prayer to protect the Church in difficult times. He paused and looked at us directly, as if wanting us to understand the depth of what he was about to say. A world that fears the truth. The silence in the room became almost tangible. None of us moved. Even the most veteran guards, accustomed to the papal presence, seemed moved by this display of vulnerability. "Just 2 hours ago," said the Pope, and I noticed how his chest rose and fell with irregular breathing. "I stepped out on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, and I felt the weight of history on my shoulders. I saw the faces of thousands of people waiting for a message of hope." The Pope paused, running his hand across his forehead as if reliving that moment before us. "I told them something that I now want to repeat to you. Let us not be afraid to proclaim the gospel." I said it twice because it is the message our world needs today more than ever. His eyes swept the room, and his voice acquired an unexpected strength. "And do you know why we are afraid? Because proclaiming the gospel today means going against the current. It means defending the truth when lies dress themselves as tolerance. It means speaking of sacrifice in a world that only wants comfort." I saw how his hands, previously trembling, now closed in a firm fist over his chest. "We are afraid because being Catholic today is accepting the cross. It's facing ridicule at university, being called outdated at work, being marginalized in culture. It's being judged by those who have never read a page of the gospel." These words fell like stones in calm water, creating visible ripples on the faces of the younger guards. As Jesus said, "If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you." To be a follower of Christ is walking the same path he walked, a path that passes through Calvary before reaching the resurrection.
"I'm going to confess something to you," said the Pope, lowering his voice a bit as one who shares a secret. His gaze became more intense, and I could see a small vein pulsing in his temple. "When I was in the Sistine Chapel, in the most intense moment of the conclave, I felt fear." These words impacted me. A pope admitting his human fear on his first day, before those who should see him as a figure of unshakable authority. Fear not of the responsibility, but of a world that seems to move further and further from God. A world where technology advances, but love retreats. Where we have more connections, but less communion. Where we build skyscrapers while families crumble. The Pope looked upward, and I saw how his eyes shone with contained emotion. Francis once told me, "Robert, the world doesn't need a perfect pope. It needs a pope who is not afraid to kneel before God and before those who suffer." Those words accompanied me when the votes accumulated and the weight began to fall upon me. I noticed how his voice broke when mentioning Francis, and how he had to pause to regain his composure. It was evident that the bond between them had been deep, and that the recent loss was still fresh in his heart. The prayer of Saint Michael, the Archangel. "And it was then," continued Pope Leo XIV, discreetly wiping away a tear, "when I remembered the prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel, the one my predecessor Leo XIII composed after a vision about the dangers threatening the Church. The Pope looked at our halberds, those ceremonial weapons that for centuries have symbolized the physical protection of the Supreme Pontiff. 'You,' he said, pointing to them, 'carry these weapons to protect me physically, But today I want us together to wield a spiritual weapon far more powerful. And then, to the astonishment of all of us, Pope Leo XIV closed his eyes, slightly bowed his head, and began to recite, "Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle." He said it in Spanish, that language he had used for so many years in his missions in Peru, and that he shared with many of the faithful of the Church. His voice, previously hesitant, now sounded firm and clear, as if each word were a declaration of war against the invisible forces threatening the Church. Be our safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. I felt a chill run down my spine. Next to me, I saw how some of the younger guards were visibly moved. Even the veterans, normally stoic, showed contained emotion in their eyes. He continued in Italian so all present could fully understand. Che Dio lo sottometta, imploriamo supplici. E tu, o principe della milizia celeste, con la potenza che ti viene da Dio, ricaccia nell'inferno Satana e gli altri spiriti maligni che si aggirano per il mondo a perdizione delle anime. When he finished, he repeated in English so everyone would understand. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. More than a tradition. When the prayer ended, silence remained for several seconds. It was as if we all understood the profound meaning of what had just occurred. The new Pope, in his first hours, was including us in a spiritual battle that transcended the walls of the Vatican. This prayer, said the Pope, catching his breath, is not just an ancient tradition. It is a declaration that we are in a spiritual war, a war for souls. His gaze became more intense, and I could see a small vein pulsing in his temple. Today, we face enemies that Leo XIII could not have imagined. A world where human life is disposable from the womb to old age, where truth is called intolerance and lies are called freedom, where we build skyscrapers while families crumble. The Pope looked upward, and I saw how his eyes shone with contained emotion. Our young people suffer an epidemic of loneliness and despair, trapped between screens that promise connection but deliver emptiness. Our families fragment under the weight of a culture that celebrates the temporary and discards the eternal. I saw the younger guards nod imperceptibly. They, who had grown up in this digital age, understood exactly what he was talking about. And we Catholics, he continued, his voice trembling with emotion, often remain silent. We are afraid of being excluded, of being pointed out, of being labeled. We are afraid to defend what we know is true. Francis understood this perfectly, he said, and upon mentioning his predecessor again, I noticed how his voice softened and his eyes glistened with what appeared to be contained tears. He would tell me, Robert, today the Church needs witnesses, not teachers. He breathed deeply, as if trying to contain the emotion that remembering the Pope who had passed so recently provoked in him. The last time we spoke, just days before his departure, he took me by the arm and told me, if someday you have to carry this cross, remember that you don't carry it alone. All those who have the courage to follow Christ in a world that rejects him, carry it with you. These words seemed to give him new strength, and his posture subtly changed, as if the memory of Francis sustained him. A church without fear. That's why, today, when I stepped out on the balcony, I repeated twice, let us not be afraid to proclaim the gospel, because that is the legacy I want to continue. A church that doesn't hide, that doesn't apologize for its faith, that loves unconditionally, but speaks the truth. The Pope straightened then, momentarily recovering the solemn posture that corresponds to the vicar of Christ. but his eyes remained those of a close shepherd. "From this day forward," he said with a firm voice, "I ask you that while you guard my person with your halberds, you also guard the church with this prayer. May it be part of your daily service, as important as your physical guard." Our commander stepped forward, and with the solemnity that characterizes every act of the Swiss Guard, responded, "Your Holiness, just as we have sworn to defend your life with ours, so shall we defend the faith with our prayers." The blessing of the halberds. What happened next was something I will never forget. Pope Leo XIV extended his hands and blessed our halberds. His fingers lightly touched the metal of the weapons in the first row, in a gesture that reminded me of ancient sword blessings before battle. "May these weapons never have to be used," he said softly, "but may their presence remind everyone that the Church is protected not only by you, but by the divine force that Saint Michael represents." I could see how his fingers trembled slightly as he touched the cold metal, and how a drop of sweat ran down his forehead despite the cool temperature of the room. This man was giving everything of himself on his first day, when others would be resting or celebrating. Breaking protocol. Before leaving, the Pope did something that completely broke protocol. He began walking among our ranks, stopping briefly before some guards, asking names, places of origin, how long they had been serving. He stopped in front of Marcel, the young guard to my right. "What is your name, son?" he asked. "Marcel Roth, Your Holiness," the boy responded with a trembling voice. "Where are you from, Marcel?" "From Lucerne, Your Holiness." "And when did you enter the guard?" "Just 2 months ago, Your Holiness." The Pope smiled warmly, placing his hand on the young man's shoulder, whose eyes widened at this unexpected gesture. "Then you and I are starting this journey together, you as a guard and I as Pope, both learning, both serving." He leaned a bit closer, and though he spoke to Marcel, his voice was clear enough for all of us to hear. "And though your friends may not understand why you left everything to serve here, and my family in America may not fully comprehend the burden I now carry, we are not afraid, are we?" I saw young Marcel's eyes moisten. This moment would be engraved in his heart forever. A personal question. When he reached my position, the Pope looked at me intensely. I noticed the small wrinkles around his eyes, marks of a life of service and prayer. "And you, I see you've been here for a while." 17 years, Your Holiness," I responded, surprised by this personal attention. "You've seen much. You've protected 2 popes before me." "Yes, Your Holiness." "What advice would you give a pope on his first day?" He asked me, taking me completely by surprise. I felt everyone looking at me. I had never expected a pope to ask me for advice. After a moment of hesitation, I responded with sincerity. "Trust, Your Holiness, in God first, and then in those of us who are here to serve you." Pope Leo XIV smiled and placed his hand on my shoulder. I could feel a slight tremor in it, a sign of the physical exhaustion he was enduring. "That is exactly the advice I needed to hear today. Thank you." The final message. When he finished his tour, the Pope returned to the center of the room. His face showed a new serenity, as if this encounter had given him strength. "Tomorrow officially begins my pontificate," he said. "The ceremonies, the audiences, the commitments, all the weight of the Church will fall upon these imperfect shoulders. But after being with you, I feel less alone in this mission." He looked at everyone present, from the most veteran to the youngest. "I ask you to pray for me, as I will pray for you. and that together, each day, we invoke the protection of Saint Michael the Archangel over the Church, over the world, and over each one of us. His hands, which I had earlier noticed trembling, now moved with decision as he made the sign of the cross. Today, from the balcony, I told the world not to be afraid to proclaim the gospel, not to be afraid to defend eternal values in changing times, not to be afraid to love unconditionally, but speak the truth. He breathed deeply, and his voice acquired a tone of conviction that resonated throughout the room. Being Catholic today means being willing to be misunderstood, to be rejected, even to suffer for what we believe. It means defending life when culture celebrates death. It means protecting the family when powerful forces seek to redefine it. It means speaking of sin and redemption when the world only wants comfort without responsibility. The entire room seemed to hold its breath at these words. But it also means loving without limits, serving without conditions, forgiving 70 times 7. That is the balance we must maintain, firm in truth but overflowing in mercy. Before I leave, he added with a tired but genuine smile, Francis taught us to be a church going forth. Now it's our turn to go out without fear, knowing we don't go alone. The Swiss Guard goes with the Pope, visible and firm, but more importantly, Christ himself goes with us, invisible but invincible. When the doors closed behind the white figure of the pontiff, we all remained in our positions for a few more seconds. The silence was solemn, charged with emotion. Finally, the commander gave the order to break ranks, but before dispersing, he did something unusual. Let us recite together the prayer we have just learned from the Holy Father. And so, as one body, the entire Swiss Guard recited the prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel, the voices of young and old united in a promise of protection that went beyond the physical. Hours later, when the night had already fallen over the Eternal City, and the lights of St. Peter's Square illuminated the last pilgrims celebrating the election, I found myself returning to the Clementine Hall. It was empty, silent, imposing in its solitude. But something had changed. The air seemed charged with a new energy, a renewed purpose. In a corner sat Marcel, the young guard, in silence. I approached him. "Can't sleep?" I asked. "No, sir," he replied. "I keep thinking about what happened, about how the Pope spoke to us, the prayer." "I know," I said, sitting beside him. "In my years here, I had never seen anything like it. Do you think it will be different, this pontificate, I mean?" I looked toward the chair where hours before Pope Leo XIV had sat, a man who on his first day had chosen humility over pomp, human connection over protocol, and spoken without fear about the real challenges we face as Catholics in today's world. "Yes, Marcel, I believe it will be different, and we are blessed to be part of it." The young man smiled, pulled out a small rosary from his pocket, and added, "It's been difficult sometimes, you know. My friends in Switzerland don't understand why I came here. They say the church is outdated, that it's disconnected. But today, listening to the Holy Father, I felt that we are exactly where the world needs us to be." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The world needs people who are not afraid to defend what is true and good, even when that means swimming against the current. The Pope is right. We are afraid because being Catholic today is accepting the cross." Marcel looked at his rosary, passing the beads between his fingers. "I've decided to pray the prayer of Saint Michael the Archangel every day during my guard duty, not just for the Pope's protection, but for all those who are afraid to live their faith in today's world." The transformation. In that moment, I knew the Pope had achieved something extraordinary on his first day. He had transformed his protectors into something deeper. We were no longer just guards of a man, but defenders of a spiritual mission, witnesses of an eternal truth in times of confusion. As a witness to this historic moment, I can tell you that the pontificate of Leo XIV began not with grandiose words for the masses, but with a moment of shared vulnerability and a deep conviction that being Catholic today requires courage, that authentic faith will always find resistance in a world that prefers comfort to truth, but that in this spiritual battle we are never alone. And in that simplicity, in that humanity, in that call not to be afraid before a world increasingly hostile to the values of the gospel, perhaps lies the key to understanding what this Pope, coming from the American continent but with a universal heart, will bring to the Church in these challenging times. What does this new beginning for the Church mean to you personally? Have you felt that same fear of living your faith in a world that often rejects it? Share your reflection in the comments and subscribe to the Sentinel of Faith channel to be part of the community that values these eternal traditions that remain alive in the heart of the Church.